You know, when we think about the American Revolution, we often picture this inevitable march to victory. But what if I told you it was anything but? In this explainer, we're diving into Rick Atkinson's The Fate of the Day to look at the middle years, from 1777 to 1780. This was a time when the entire revolution was, and I mean this literally, teetering on the absolute brink of collapse. These are dreadful times. Just let that sink in. This wasn't some soldier freezing in a field saying that. This was coming from the continental authorities themselves, the guys in charge. For the people actually living through it, victory was a distant dream. It was a desperate, chaotic struggle where the fate of the nation could swing on a single battle, a diplomatic screw-up, or even just the weather. So the first thing you really got to grasp about this period is that it was a war of just jarring extremes. I'm talking about incredible, world-changing victories and soul-crushing defeats happening at almost the exact same time. It must have felt like the worst kind of whiplash. And the sheer contradiction of this moment is just staggering. In October of 1777, the Continental Army pulls off the impossible at Saratoga. They capture an entire British army. This is a victory that shocks the world. At the very same time, the British Army basically waltzes into Philadelphia, the nation's capital, forcing the Continental Congress to literally pack its bags and run for it. How do you win so big and lose so badly at the same time? And this quote from George Washington just rips away the celebratory headlines. Because while the news of Saratoga is spreading like wildfire, his main army is stumbling into Valley Forge. He reports that nearly 3,000 of his men are unfit for duty, not because they're wounded, but because they are, in his words, barefoot and otherwise naked, literally freezing and starving, while the nation is celebrating its greatest triumph. So here's the thing. Losing Philadelphia was a disaster. Valley Forge was an absolute nightmare. But that victory at Saratoga, that was the one event that had the power to change everything. It was the spark that was about to turn this colonial rebellion into a full-blown global war. And the news from Saratoga didn't just rally people in America. Oh no, it shot across the Atlantic, landing with explosive force right in the middle of the salons of Paris, and right at the feet of Benjamin Franklin. Now, Franklin wasn't exactly suffering like the men at Valley Forge. He was a rock star in Paris, whining and dining and living, as he put it, as comfortably as a man can well do. But don't mistake that comfort for inaction. He was waging a totally different kind of war. A war of wit, charm, and brilliant diplomacy, all aimed at one thing: convincing the French king to finally, officially back the American cause. And Franklin's effectiveness was just stunning. Saratoga was the hard proof the French needed that these Americans could actually win. He absolutely seized the moment. By December, he's making the formal case to the French court, and just 2 months later, boom, France signs the Treaty of Alliance. This was the game changer. Suddenly, Britain wasn't just fighting its colonies anymore, it was fighting its oldest and most powerful enemy. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? The French alliance wasn't some magic wand. Yeah, it brought French money, French ships, and French soldiers, but it also brought a whole new set of really complex problems, which became obvious in the very first attempt at a joint operation. So the plan to take back the British-held city of Newport, Rhode Island in 1778 seemed pretty straightforward on paper. You've got the powerful French fleet blocking the port by sea and American forces surrounding the city on land. A classic pincer move. What could possibly go wrong? Well, for starters, Mother Nature had other plans. Just as the whole operation was getting underway, a monster of a storm, a nor'easter, slams right into the coast. It scatters both fleets, batters the ships, and badly damages the French flagship. And this is where the new alliance nearly shattered before it even got going. The French admiral, D'Estaing, with his fleet all banged up, made the logical military choice. He sailed to Boston for repairs. But to the American army left on the ground, it looked like they were being abandoned. Their commander, General Sullivan, was furious, and he publicly accused the French of desertion. The first big joint operation ended in total failure and a whole lot of bitter feelings. And this quote from the young Marquis de Lafayette that just captures the tension perfectly. Here's a guy who's an American major general, but he's also a French nobleman. He's stuck right in the middle, desperately trying to calm everyone down, reminding his American friends of his loyalty while also defending the actions of his countrymen. It was a painful lesson. Having a powerful ally and actually being able to fight with one are two very different things. So France's entry into the war forced Britain to completely change its game plan. With the French Navy now a global threat, Britain couldn't just focus all its power on America. The war for a quick, decisive knockout punch was over, and in its place came a new, much uglier strategy: a war of attrition and terror. Britain's new approach was just brutal. It wasn't just about beating the army anymore. It was about breaking the will of the American people. This meant burning down coastal towns, stirring up a terrifying war on the frontier, and using ruthless tactics like no-flint night attacks, where soldiers would charge using only their bayonets to create maximum shock and terror. And the attack on Colonel Baylor's dragoons was a perfect, terrifying example of this. The Americans were surprised in their sleep and shown absolutely no mercy. A surgeon who arrived on the scene afterwards could only describe it as a horrid massacre. This wasn't about winning hearts and minds anymore. This was about instilling pure, raw fear. This new, harsher strategy led to one huge decision: to shift the main theater of the war down to the south. The British leadership truly believed the southern colonies were the revolution's soft underbelly, that they were full of loyalists just waiting to rise up and join the king's cause as soon as the army showed up. Lord George Germain, the man directing the war from London, called his strategy piecemeal reduction. Basically, the idea was, let's stop trying to swallow the whole thing at once. Let's conquer the colonies one by one, starting in the south, and then just roll north. They were going to try and dismember the revolution from the bottom up. And the key to this entire southern gambit was one city: Charleston, South Carolina. It was the wealthiest city in America, a vital port, and the strategic linchpin of the whole region. If you could take Charleston, you could take the South. And in late 1779, the British gathered a massive invasion force to do exactly that. 5,610. That is the number of American soldiers who surrendered at Charleston in May of 1780. It was the single largest surrender of American forces until the Civil War. An entire American army, the professional core of the whole Southern defense, was just wiped off the map. It was, and this is no exaggeration, the single greatest disaster of the entire war for the American cause. Which brings us to the final, chilling question. By the middle of 1780, the French alliance had started on a sour note, the economy had totally collapsed, and now the entire Southern army was gone. The British strategy seemed to be working perfectly. So the question wasn't about winning anymore. It was, how could the revolution possibly survive at all?